Stephen Young, the guy that we're going to be talking to on the call today, I've had the pleasure with working with Stephen on a few occasions with doing courses around crisis management with crisis response organisations like oil spill agencies, fire brigades. Stephen's had 40 years of experience both locally and globally with large-scale crisis management, and some of that's been really short, acute crisis. So it hits, it's huge, it has massive impact, and then it's gone fairly quickly. And some of it's been long burn, more like what this is. He held a position for 3 years as the co-chair on Queensland's pandemic task force. So he knows a little bit about this space specifically and dealing with pandemic crises. And he's also a published author in the space and has done a bit of study in crisis management at Harvard as well. So he's really well qualified in this space. I always enjoy having a chat to him because he's a wide-ranging thinker that thinks beyond just the immediate applications and problems with what's going on. So Steve, I'll take you off mute and welcome you to the call. How are you there in Queensland? Assuming my unmute button works, we will talk to Stephen. Do you want to have a crack at unmuting yourself your end, mate? It doesn't seem to be letting me do that.
Is that working now?
Yep, we've got you. Well done.
Excellent. The joys of technology.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And we have poor internet here in Brisbane, so who knows? Let's go.
Yeah.
So thanks for the invitation, mate.
Yeah, pleasure. You said in that little outline that we sent to people, there's 5 tasks in dealing with crisis for leaders, and they apply fairly broadly, whether you're a leader of something big or whether it's just you and your family. And the first 3 are ones that we'll talk about today. So sense making, decision making and coordination, and then meaning making. Do you want to give us a bit of an outline of sense making in practical terms? What's that all about? It looks like you might have frozen there, mate. We'll give that a little while to recover. Stephen and I did a test call earlier today and delving into the wonders of Australian broadband to see whether we could actually talk to each other. He's muted himself again. Here we go. It looks like you're unfrozen. Go for it. Sense making. If we don't get any joy with that, we'll tackle some other things and maybe loop back to Stephen later on. Mate, someone's just said you don't look old enough for 40 years worth of crisis management experience. I agree. It's a good comment.
I'm not sure whether you can hear me or not.
Yep, you're all clear now.
Frozen.
You're clear.
As has everyone.
Alrighty, it doesn't look like we're having a whole load of joy there. So what we might do is just see if we can clean that connection up with Stephen. I was going to ask you a question. The back end of the back end of this whole process is around obviously recovering from crisis. So one of the things Stephen and I have been talking about is getting into a recovery session. So just while we tidy that internet connection up, I might I'll do another share screen and I'll get your thoughts as an audience on this question. So if Stephen and I were to run a session post this one on recovery, what would you like to see covered in that? If you open a browser and go to that address, ahaslides.com/renew that you can see at the top of your screen there, you'll be able to give us what would be useful. So, you know, as we come through this thing, we're obviously going to have to stay in crisis management mode for a while. The nature of that changes out of immediate decisions into something a little broader. And then at some point, we'll start to look into recovery, and setting ourselves up for that is an equally important piece. So if you want to log into there and give us your thoughts on recovery. And Stephen appears to have unfrozen again, so we'll hop back to him while that's happening in the background and see how we go. Yeah, fingers crossed on the NBN. So sense making, mate. Give us a practical understanding of that.
Sense making. Well, right. I think it's been the hardest part of this particular crisis, to be honest, because we have no experience with that. So it's very hard to kind of draw on anything. So from a practical sense, sense making's often thought about as kind of joining the dots. And I'm a bit of a believer in that if you join the wrong dots, you end up with the wrong picture. So there's a I like go find what counts as dots. For instance, it's been particularly difficult to identify what actually counts as dots. And I think that's why most business leaders and organisations, and in fact, even us as kind of community members, trying to figure out what's actually happening and when it's happening has been a real challenge.
Yeah, so the challenge of joining the dots, and if you're not even sure what are dots to start with, that becomes even more difficult. Do you have a take on what counts as dots in this current scenario?
Yeah, I think I had a bit of a think about this, and I think that there are some consistent themes that you could say are dots, and others that are specific to an individual organisation or a community group, or in fact even your family. But I think some of the dots that need to be considered are what are your people saying? What's their attitude? How's this affecting your people? And that's, I guess, those directly affected. And around your supply chain, how are they going? Are they suffering significant impacts? What's the internal and external narrative? So what are people saying about the coronavirus in respect to your organisation? What's your intent and what's your objective? So what do you hope to achieve out of this? Is it surviving? Is it thriving? Is it getting better? You mentioned the recovery bit. What's your recovery target? In fact, all of the CEOs that I've been speaking to in the last few weeks, I've been saying to them, you really should be thinking about recovery now, not in 6 weeks' time. And they say, yeah, but we don't know how long this is going to last. And I said, exactly.
Yeah.
You need to start doing forecasting. If this is 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, you really should kind of have an idea that when you're ready to recover, the first opportunity, you can lay out your recovery plan. A couple others that are probably worth noting with this one particularly, what's the science behind the crisis? And then this one has been a real challenge because, the statistics that come out of countries and the strategies that other countries are using, it's hard to know whether they're fair income. Certainly some of the numbers that have come out of China, for instance, have been disputed broadly across the world. What's the available expertise? What's your past experience in this? We don't have any past experience in a COVID-19 style. People are saying, oh, it's just like the 1918 Spanish flu. Well, we're a bit more advanced, a bit more connected, probably a little bit less resilient. Who controls the battleground? We really hold the battleground. We don't know when the lockdown's going to stop. We hear in the US that President Trump's talking about the end of April, but his June. Well, that's a bit unreassuring for business leaders, I would suspect. And I guess a couple of other final ones is what are the regulators saying? And this kind of goes to any crisis, really. And then the final one is, what is it we don't know? That's a huge dot.
Yeah.
And there's so much about this particular crisis we don't have any idea about. So that's just some of the things that I think count as dots.
Yeah, there's some big ticket stuff in there, isn't there? That's it's a huge piece of territory.
There is, yep.
So what factors are there, do you think, in effective sense making? You know, part of that job is, you know, gathering information. As Jason said in his session about decision making, the information's always going to be incomplete. That's kind of until we've got 20/20 hindsight. So for you, what do you reckon the key factors are in making sense of it all?
Well, I guess the first one is if you have no experience in a particular field, like we don't have a great deal of experience in COVID-19, and that experience is building as the days go by, it's hard to identify what you don't know if you don't know it. And you're also, I'd bundle into that experience bit, what people experience in leading a crisis. If this is your first crisis that you've had to lead in a meaningful way, well, this is a pretty big one. You know, this will test anybody's mettle, I would have thought. Your personal biases. So think about all those human biases that we suffer from. You know, information bias would be a big one here, and confirmation bias also. I think the discipline of self and the team, the discipline to actually not assume stuff, to actually dig deeper into that kind of analysis. And we tend, and I don't mean this in a kind of derogatory way, but I think in many instances we tend to be a little bit lazy with this stuff. We tend to sort of scratch at the surface, and we don't bother to do that deeper analysis, when in fact, to make proper sense of the issue, we need that. And I've talked about this previously, but the information, the availability of it, the quality and the quantity of the information in this case has been a real challenge for organisations. And then the final piece is how do you what process have you got to manage this information and convert it from information into intelligence that actually guides your kind of decision making? And I think they're the real elements. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly one of the things that we've spoken about before on the courses that we've run is the challenge of, you know, you get a piece of information, you make a decision, you start to enact and implement a plan, and then information changes, so that, you know, staying light with information, that ability to, you know, to stay in the sense-making game, so that you're not locking yourself down to a perspective that's too narrow, based on something that might have been true a couple of days ago, but could be radically different today. Have you got any insight on that, like keeping yourself nimble around that thing of not getting too locked in on where?
I was taught when I was rising up through the ranks in the fire service to ask a simple question: so what? And as a cheeky fire, it's kind of like, so what? But I think as I've gotten older and probably maybe a little bit wiser, although some, I think they're asking the question, so what does this mean? So a change in information, change in status, what does this mean? Is this just noise? Is this just another piece of information that's sort of bubbled up? Or is this actually a game changer for us? And I think that's where the discipline comes in, when that new information comes in, to actually say, so what does this mean to us as a team or an organisation? Does that change our approach? And I think that word nimble, because often in a crisis we stick to that course of action, irrespective of the changes in data and intelligence.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Steve. So Jason Clark, who we had on last week, did a great job of talking us through a practical tactic for making big decisions. So the other part of decision making in crisis is coordination. So Probably one of the biggest questions in that is who do we involve in making our decisions, and how do we do that? Because there's many stakeholders, particularly for organisations. It's legitimate to talk to all of them, but when, where, how, a fairly big question.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Mike, because I think that if we look at some of the recent crises that have been played out in the public arena, you have to question the decision making of the leaders, and of course those leaders inevitably disappear. And I often look at that and I think, was that through poor decision making, or was that through a lack of coordination with those decisions? And I think that that's the secret, is trying to identify who needs to be part of that decision. And I think that it's a human trait that we become myopic and inward focused during a crisis. So when we get put under pressure, everything narrows down. We pinpoint everything and we forget to look outwards, and that takes, as you know, in your field, it takes a great deal of discipline to actually step back from the situation and take a broader look. So I think kind of having a think about who might be affected by this decision. So if I make this decision, who's going to be affected by that decision might often give you a tell. Need to community endorsement do I need? So do I have the right to make this decision? Have I got the power, or do I need to go to the board, or do I need to go to my CEO, or do I need to go to the government, or do I need to go to the regulator to make that decision? Another one is who might be able to help us with that decision. So if I make a decision and implement it, who might be able to help me make that more successful, likelihood of it being successful. And then the final one, I think, is how might my decision be viewed internally and externally? What might that look like on the front page of tomorrow's newspapers? Always, in my mind, a great ethics test. Yeah. Would I like to read about that tomorrow morning on the front page of the Courier Mail or the Australian? So I think they're kind of the four things that I think about if I'm advising someone about how they should ensure better coordination with their decisions.
Yeah, I think they're crackers, Stephen. I like how would this look on the front page of the paper? Even if it's a decision that you're making personally or for your family, that's still not a bad lens to run the thing through, just to go, all right, well, how would this shape up? Obviously, for organisations, they're in a position where it could well be on the front page of tomorrow's paper. But, it's a good lens either way.
Yep.
If we move into meaning making,
and look, just one point on that, Mike, on the decision making bit. I think that it can often be the second wave of the crisis. So if you get that part wrong and you make a decision that has a really bad look publicly, that can be the second wave of the crisis, and that can be enough to tip you off your direction and drag resources away dealing with that crisis now instead of the primary crisis.
Yeah, you often see that when leaders come under fire for decisions they've made or the way that they've communicated them, and that it ends up becoming the main thing they're managing rather than they're managing the crisis itself. So in terms of meaning making, crisis, can you do meaning making without making and decisions and coordination? Is it standalone, or does it sort of come in order?
Yeah, I think you can if you want to get it wrong. Put simply, I think if you want to completely get it wrong, you can do it without actually you having an understanding of the situation, which is often the way. I mean, you see, when I watch crises unfold in the media, I think you guys don't actually know what's happened yet, and you're making public statements about it. And I kind of fear for them, and I have a personal view about why that occurs, and it's backed up by years of experience. But I think you can't make meaning of the situation for others my side to help me out. And in many ways, what I think our political leaders have done pretty well lately is that they've been able to make meaning of this COVID-19 issue and almost get permissive consent from us to lock us down. You imagine if the government said that we're going to lock you down. And I think that they've been really good at a difficult situation of making meaning. And I think they get better at that. They've gotten better at that day by day. I think because they understand the situation better day by day.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I'd agree with that. I think they've done a pretty stellar job here.
Yeah, I do too.
And, the Kiwis, I think, are another example of seem to be doing a really good job of it. And it's interesting just to watch that compared to a few other countries where things are not going anywhere near as smoothly. There's a good question coming in, which is there benefit in asking if each decision is best made with a short-term or a long-term view in mind?
Is there benefit sorry?
Is there benefit in asking if the decision is best made with a short-term view or a long-term view?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's a really good question. I think that if we're planning on making a decision that impacts others, but we need to do that for our organisational benefit, then I think is helping someone understand this is going to be a short-term thing. How does that, or a long-term thing? How does that affect you?
Yeah.
Because one of the things in my experience leading a couple of big natural disasters is often there's a conflict of intent. And trying to cross intent sometimes is impossible. So you just need this is the reason I'm doing this, I'm making this decision and implementing this. I know we're not going to get agreement on this, but you just have to accept that we have to do that for the benefit of X.
Yeah.
And I think most people will cop that. So that's a good question.
Yeah. I think from my point of view that the answer to that depends a bit where you are in the crisis. Like we've seen a lot of early decisions made both by businesses, individuals, government, where that decision maybe wouldn't be one that would want to stand long term, and you'd want some way of navigating it long term, but you need to do something now. And then as we're settling into this kind of period where the immediate stuff's sort of been taken care of, you can shift your view to a more long-term view. And as you said, start thinking even about what do we do on the other side of this, which is, getting into that recovery space. You've got a really cool... Sorry, go.
Sorry. No, you ask a question, sorry.
So you've got a really cool process for communication, for crisis messaging, I guess, which... So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, I reckon this, and in fact, I've taught a few CEOs this, and one in particular liked it so much that she made it her mandate for internal communications as well, so for non-crisis related comms. And it's been around a bit. It's often viewed as the kind of the golden standard in many organisations, but I think it works perfectly well because one, it's incredibly transparent, and two, it tells me exactly what's going on. The first bit is this is what we know. So you tell your stakeholders, internal, external, this is what we know, and the only way you can do that is by understanding the situation, by doing your sense making properly. So what does that do? It tells me what the organisation knows. Then we follow that directly up with this is what we don't know. As you said, I've been doing this for 40 years. The number of times I've had to brief people and I've not been fully aware of everything going on, not because I'm not fully aware of it, because I don't know it yet. It's like starting a movie you kind of make your way through a movie and you get to the end and you know how it all played out. Well, that's exactly how a crisis or an incident unfolds. As you start at the start and you uncover new chapters along the way. So this is what we don't know. So now we're telling everybody we know these things and we don't know those things. The third element to this is what we're doing about it. So now we're saying to everyone, hey, we don't know these things. We know these things, and we're doing this. And then the final piece of this is we need you to do this.
Yeah, great.
And in a crisis, often if you can get the community to behave properly, your community to behave properly, then that can really reduce the consequences of that, which is why if you look at messaging now around big natural disasters, and in particular the COVID, they've been really quite open about, hey, if we don't do this, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people will die, and I think that's a really, really powerful example of the way they've been communicating. They're telling us what they know. They're telling us what they don't know. They're telling us what they're doing, the stimulus packages and the policy changes and the border restrictions. And this is what we need you to do. We need you to stay at home. We need you to wash your hands. We need you to do all these preventative measures. And I think that's a really transparent and a completely whole method of communicating. And I reckon if more organisations did that in a crisis, they'd be better off, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think that serves us well in everyday normal sort of running as well.
I think so.
I like the bit about what we don't know, specifically expressing that. I think helps with that bit we were talking about earlier of staying agile and nimble about the data. It's like, okay, well, there's all these questions that we've got. We actually don't have answers to them. It's a really useful thing to actually publicly discuss so that you're not locked into a little narrow window and world. Steve,
what I'd like to see, Mike, coordinations. What I like to see in a coordination centre, and I rarely see it, is I like to see a board that we don't know this.
Yeah.
Because it's the stuff you don't know that hurts you. It's not the stuff you know. The stuff you know you can manage and you can deal with, you can respond to. It's the stuff you don't know that should be the stuff that keeps you awake at night in a crisis. And I think that's been certainly, if you listen to the scientists when they articulate about COVID-19, they articulate that a lot about we just don't know some of this stuff, and we're evolving our thinking about treatments and about all sorts of things as each patient presents to us. So I think that's a really important one. And the other thing too that I like about we don't know this is it shows transparency, and that transparency builds trust.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real key, mate. That's been an excellent little summary of that territory. If people want to touch base with you or find out more about your work, how would they do that?
They can email me. Will you send out a link from here?
Yeah,
Mike,
we will. We'll,
at the end of this,
circulate your email and website details.
Yes, please. That'd be great. Yeah, and happy to answer and happy to provide more info on this as a bit of an info pack too, if people would like a kind of a summary of this.
Great.
This session.
Yeah, look, if you're happy to do that, maybe send that across, and we'll send that out when we send the recording. And certainly, this is a pretty complex piece of territory. So if there's anyone on the call that would like to have a chat to Stephen in more nitty-gritty detail about how this applies to your world, then certainly be in touch, and that'd be a useful thing to do.